All right. Good evening. Welcome to our workshop meeting, Board of Trustees, 6:30 p.m. Village Hall, June 16th, 2026. Can I get a motion to open the meeting? Deputy Mayor Galen, second trustee Suma, all in favor? All in attendance? And we are gonna kick this off with the discussion of the comprehensive plan preliminary draft. Which is like earlier than a draft,
Yeah, so basically, yeah, so let me just give you, so.
but yet still a draft. But we want it.
So we were trying to make sure we got this meeting so that we could actually have a general discussion with the board. And then to talk a little bit about timeframes. So the comprehensive plan committee also received this version of the draft. The same time you received this draft. We are ultimately right now collecting for substantive in terms of content comments. We will be reviewing it again for like typos and grammar and those types of things before anything goes out fully to the public. But this is really to start the process of you reviewing the goals and recommendations and vision that was put together by the committee and also through public input. And then to, make sure that you feel comfortable with what's in the comprehensive plan itself.
Oh, I'm real fast. And for you three, just to, and, I don't know, Mike's memory might be that, but he's on the comp plan steering committee, so probably not. So I'm gonna stop with that joke, but the comp plan process started a year and a half ago.
Yes, about that, yep.
Year and a half ago, they I can't remember the origin of how it came to pass. Can you give us real fast with that?
Yes, so there was Village of Dobbs Ferry went through a RISE assessment with Pace University. And as part of that, which was like basically looking at the overall structure within the community in terms of sustainability and best practices.
From a sustainability lens.
Yes. And as you were going through that process, it became clear that you have a lot of committees sort of operating in silos, and a lot of good work has been developed from those committees, but the different committees really didn't know that other committees are working on various aspects. And then you also had the village board, which was also engaged in doing a lot of capital projects. The New York Forward was potentially going to be coming. So there was a lot of those elements, and I think that the overall decision was to look at all aspects of the village and kind of combine it into like one document in terms of like goals and recommendations. And in addition, you had some potential projects funneling through that were going to actually look at zoning edits. You were in the midst of updating some additional zoning amendments and zoning code changes. And you also had a comprehensive plan that was 15 years old at this point.
Yes.
So
Last plan was 2010.
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
The vision plan.
Comprehensive plan, it was a vision.
Right,
plan,
it was-
Which.
right.
It's designed as a vision plan, but it's
somewhat
not
something
finished now.
in terms of its.
Right.
Legal implications, I understand.
And it's common to update them every 10 or so
Yeah.
years. So we were behind, we had done like a RFP for one in 2020, but we stopped that process at the time. And we implemented a different one, which is like do minor changes to zoning code along the way. But like Valerie said, we really needed this.
Yeah, so I think it was an overall decision to like, let's begin this process. So that's where
And so then there's been a gazillion meetings of this steering committee, which has representatives from all of our boards and committees who have done tremendous work. Both in their boards and committees with different research and reports and, things to contribute to the data of this plan. But then also the representatives met monthly for a very long time. We took a pause when we found out we got New York Forward because there was going to be more public comment. We didn't want to have like two weird ways of getting public comment for different things, so we took a little pause. So this was all supposed to wrap up a little sooner, but because of New York Forward, it didn't. And so now we're getting back on, on the train, and all of those meetings yielded this giant set of goals and recommendations. And then since then, we've taken time, significant time to craft the document to make it as like useful as possible. And so now that is what we have, is the efforts of all of that have come to this piece. And before it becomes the first proper draft that goes to like a public meeting, that we present in any way as like the draft of the comp plan, we wanted to give everybody a moment to look at it and say like, hold on, this is really still confusing to me, this could be better, before we even go to that draft. This is that moment. And so we have now to have that preliminary conversation, but then, you know, he can read it in more detail over the next, however, till the end of the month. And the steering committee is also looking at it. They've generally been in support, like the language and the words of it are pretty much approved by the whole steering committee, and we've just been trying to optimize like the actual way that you get the information. It's just so dense, there's a lot. And so that's what we've been primarily tinkering with up until now. So
Yeah, and I think you'll see a number of like conceptual designs, and you'll see some key properties which have also sort of an overall vision of those properties. A lot of them were conceptual in nature on purpose, because ultimately the next step would be potentially zoning modifications, or as you develop your capital projects, you know, there will be, well, those will also be like basically modified and more detailed as you go through that public outreach process, like for example, for some of the New York Forward projects. So because of that, we meant for these to be concepts as opposed to very specific details, because there is still going to be additional public comment and process associated with the developing of those details.
But one big component of this was for our committee to take large properties and to conceive of how they might be used in the future if they are developed in a way that's different from their institutional nature now. So and the reason that that's important to do is that you know, you can use an example from the past to highlight why this is valuable. When Rivertown Square came, there was no vision for what that site would be. And so the vision was crafted by the developer who had different interests in mind than the village might have if they had thought about it in that way. So we looked at all the EI properties, that's like, you know, the golf course, Children's Village, a number of others, and we conceived of what we would want those to be if they were to be sold and redeveloped. And that came from, you know, there was an environmental component, there was a, you know, a housing and social component, there was a connectivity and trail network component, a lot of things tie into that, but that's a really big part of this, is thinking about future land use. And then there's some smaller picking on, you know, looking at some districts that could, you know, maybe we change the zoning a little bit to increase density, but there's not a lot in that respect. It's really mostly about these big institutional properties.
Right, and all these maps and concept plans and designs were all already presented to the public in the first and second workshops. So those were all that was integrated into this comprehensive plan as well.
where do we start?
So, I mean, I really think, I guess in general, you know, if you already have had a chance to take a look at anything and have comments or questions, we're happy to answer, and, you know, talk about that tonight. If you are just starting to dive into the document, that's absolutely fine too. And if the mayor and I were thinking, if you could provide me any comments, you know, by the end of the month, and then we would look to see if any of them are substantive enough that requires additional discussion, and at which point we can bring it back to the board and have another conversation about this. If it's more minor items, you know, in terms of like, can you like rephrase the sentence, or I'm a little confused about this particular thing, you know, then for the most part, we would like to be able to move forward in July of potentially having that discussion of issuing a draft comprehensive plan for the public to start reviewing. We'll be meeting with the comprehensive plan committee on June 22nd. And so again, we'll be taking their final comments or feedback at this point. And so ideally, if things are not substantive, we would then roll this out in July. If there are still substantive comments or, items to deal with, then we would come back to the discussion in July and hopefully roll out in August.
Who wants to start?
Well, okay, so I had one observation, as I was, reading through, and I'm not nearly finished reading through. But one of the things that we've been talking about is a process for, sort of, I don't know how best to say this, but sort of having committees be a little less independent. And, have, more of a working relationship with the board and with departments that they might partner with, and still obviously bring us recommendations for things, but not quite have the autonomy where some will just sort of start a project and then let us know when they have a recommendation that has a dollar amount associated with it. And I noticed, the first section is the sustainability section, and I would say, roughly a third to a half of the recommendations say at the end, and sustainable Dobbs could do this, or sustainable Dobbs could do this with the DPW. And that seems a little bit at odds with what we're trying to do, in terms of, sort of having committees, obviously, yes, propose work, but have them work under the oversight of a department or department head, who might just say like, yes, go off and do it. But I think it's better for us not to, in the comprehensive plan, say, and they'll take care of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think, we've had a lot of support from volunteers over the years, and I think what we're trying to get to is having everybody on the same page so that the staff is involved or leading the work as they should be, because they're ultimately the ones fiscally responsible, like us, for whatever the work is. And so I think if we just read through some of those items with the lens of like, how could we edit it to make
Yep.
sure that the responsibility it lies with the people who are fiscally responsible for whatever it is, like the property or the 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 money and the property, the things that we own, that the village controls, and can have support from volunteers and groups, but just making sure that we're doing that. And what's the best way to review it with that lens, Lori Lee? Like, is that something that we would ask like you and Rob to review it and just look through it as to like, is that the person who should be called out as, or is that the entity that should be called out as who can support these things?
Well,
Or
you could even broaden it further. You could say to be assigned as appropriate obviously the fiscal responsibilities are yours and yours alone, as are the legislative responsibilities, yours and yours alone as a trustee. But we can broaden the language to be with the task to be assigned by the village to, the appropriate entity or individual.
right, because I think anytime it says something like that, it's really like it's the village's responsibility to do whatever it is.
Yep.
And
Might-
so that it
Yes,
doesn't have to have any specificity in it. And I think the point of it, it's likely coming from the Sustainable Dobbs Committee that is like, who wrote it and is like offering to provide the support for that. But in a comp plan, it should be written such that like it's the village's job. And then, yes, we will get support from
Yeah.
people, sure, but
Do you think it even needs to say?
Right, it doesn't have to-
No,
I
it
think that
probably
could
doesn't.
be
We could
eliminated.
probably,
it's just like a
right.
That's
goal.
what I
And
said.
Right,
the
we can
recommendation
remove-
is that this should happen.
This
You
should-
know,
Right,
just
we
like-
can remove, like, a lot of it was at the last sentence, which was
Yeah.
highlighting, so we
Yeah.
could remove that sentence and it doesn't change.
Yeah.
And then in the end, when we
Recommendations,
have that
so recommendations.
appendix where it's like highlight, it's really broken down as to who is responsible for the
Yes.
execution of things, like they can, like, boards would be in the bullet list, but it would also have who the village like.
Right, so what we can
representative
do is we can make sure that implementation matrix specifically has the primary responsible party as like the village board. And then the supporting parties can be the committees.
Mhm.
Okay, we can do that.
But you don't have to write that for every single one, this seems like most of.
Well, there are like, so for example, there are like, for example, there is like, one of the recommendations is like encourage the use of building materials and products that have been extracted, harvested, recovered, or manufactured within 500 miles of the site.
Mhm.
And we identified primary responsible party is Sustainable Dobbs, because that could be education and outreach
Mhm.
materials, not something that the village board needs to specifically, like,
Right.
you know, fund. But what we can do is we can just make sure if it's anything that deals with funding policies or anything like that, that specifically has village board.
Right.
And then anything with like educational and outreach or something that, you know, that's typical under a committee, that they could be the responsible parties.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
Okay,
and like that's the kind of thing that would be up for us to look at this, all of this, besides like the content of what it's recommending, is like making sure there's no red flags from our board. But like when we're on the steering committee, I wasn't looking at any of it with that lens of like, you know, what would it be? How do we look at it when we're taking it to the board of trustees level? It was more about what the content was and like what kind of ideas were in there. So that's what we can be.
Recommendations aren't requirements, right? I mean,
No.
there's not a, like, we're not making a decision now, like, oh, we don't want that requirement, so let's not have this recommendation. Like, the
That's correct.
recommendations can be there whether we get to them or not.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
just a recommendation, yeah.
And they'll get interpreted some other way than we intend by some other people.
So, sure.
Just always-
Well, and it's supposed to be much like, you know, many public documents. It's supposed to be living and breathing, so it's supposed to apply as things come up on an ad hoc basis. So you want to just have a good framework. And the recommendations are mandatory, they're recommendations, so, yeah.
So one kind of structural question I have about the way this is done, or the way it's set up, and I know that kind of setting it up to make the information usable has been a significant part of this undertaking. But if I project us 12 months from now, 18 months from now, 2 years from now, even if the board is the exact same people, like thinking about how this document actually gets used, I think that's where I think maybe there could be another level of probably adding like a prioritization lens. Or the other thing is, it seems like there are themes, like we have these goals, and I was just looking back at our 3 goals for 2026. Modern tools for effective operations, clear planning for resilient infrastructure, and more value for every dollar. It sort of seems like all of the goal sets in this comprehensive plan document kind of fit into, like, some of them are a little bit redundant, like some of them get into like more education around, you know, like you just said, like reusing materials or using materials from within a 500-mile radius to further sustainability goals. But like the sustainability goals are already baked into like everything that we're doing, and like civic engagement is already baked into everything we're doing. Like if these 3 that we landed on for this year are sort of like, I'm not saying these are the right 3 forever, but like this captures basically everything that's in those top, I don't remember how many goal categories there were, for 12 or 14, but they just, like the multimodal dovetails with the sustainability, dovetails with the rezoning, you know, they're all, I just wonder if it could be streamlined in a way that was a little more actionable and also prioritized. So it wasn't just a like ease of effort, but like prioritization, kind of like, if X happens, then Y should be looked at. But if X doesn't happen, then Y gets kicked another 5 or 10 years to some future.
Yeah, how have the comp plan been I feel like I've seen in the end where there can be like most impact and, you know, like there's like a matrix or something that shows things that have more impact. Heavy lift, more impact type of,
So we have at the end, there's a plan implementation, there's a matrix where it has implementation timeframe, short, long, ongoing and medium. And specifically, short is, would be implemented within 3 years of adoption, medium term, 4 to 7 years. Long term should be implemented in 10 years, like that's just the so long term is really there, it's gonna be more work, right? It's more work, it's more effort, it's more money. Versus short term, it's simple solutions that could be implemented easily without those types of.
I guess it's the impact part that's not.
So, but I think it's impact to what?
Yeah.
And
Impact to
I
what?
Right,
think
like,
I think
is it-
you're comparing two very different approaches to strategy. And in what you compare what is a 2026 goal to what is a 10 to 15 year framework in which our board and future boards think about the goals that they set for that year. And I don't think you can, I mean, you can rearrange the subject headings if we were to reprioritize them, like we think that whatever, sustainability should be at the top of the document. But I don't see how you could extract from each category a one or two priorities and then reorganize the document based on that. I think you
I'm not
have,
saying to reorganize it based on that, I'm saying like, first of all, there is no prioritization that I'm reading in here, like, to me, it read kind of like.
It's not, right, there's
It's
not,
not,
right,
yeah.
you're not
So,
really
like,
meant to do.
Yeah.
I think
not the goal.
So my suggestion is, I think probably we should have, I just think having, hundreds and hundreds, which is like, to have this list is incredible, but I also think in order for this to be an actionable document, probably we need to take a crack at not just how long it's gonna take us to do something, but how important it is to prioritize. And I'm not saying prioritize based on sustainability versus transit. I'm saying like, what's more of an
but
emergency?
you already have that. That's already here, right? You have this large infrastructure of ways in which we should be thinking about problems, right? And then each year or each couple of years, you can tackle certain of those. And when you are looking for a reference for how to address these particular issues, at 2028, there's a different 3 priorities, and those priorities will likely have references in this comp plan as to how to deal with them. So I think that's there. It's just it's not this document.
Well, if I can maybe try to explain where I'm coming from. I think where I was going with my reflection was that these 3 goals that we came up with for 2026 are actually bigger than the categories of goals that are currently in this comp plan preliminary draft. So I'm wondering if it would make sense, and maybe this is unnecessary effort for no outcome, but I think if to me, all of the categories in this comp plan are equally important. Like, you couldn't say sustainability is more important than transit, it's more important than housing, it's more important than economic development. We have to be pushing all of them forward at once. And I think the question is, within each set of priorities, what are the most important high impact things at this moment? But the reason why I think having some sort of order of operations makes sense is because if it's just 1,000 recommended actions and no kind of sorting other than this one touches sustainability slightly more than transit, so we're calling it a sustainability recommendation instead of a transit recommendation, even though you could easily put it in transit. I think the issue is we know that there are so many things that have a long lead time that we need to do now, so that in 5 years or in 10 years, when we want to bury the wires, for example, in the downtown, we've already done the thing that had to happen back here, like we've done the traffic studies that show us that we can narrow Cedar Street to.
So you're looking for like, what are the dependencies?
I think that's part of it, but also like some kind of best attempt at a. I just think you're gonna get to the level of granularity that's in these recommendations, which are very tactical projects, a lot of them, which I was really surprised to see I think they're all amazing ideas. I didn't realize that the comprehensive plan would include recommendations at that like granular of a project level. If it does, then I think we need, if we're gonna be that tactical with the recommendations that we're including and say that these are all equally, and communicate that these are all equally valid or viable things to explore, I think we should also it needs a little more structure around it.
So-
Is it with
But
With
the,
comp plans, don't they, I mean, normally the idea is the comp plan is comprehensive, so it's just like, it's very. Comprehensive, but then
Right.
when you adopt it, everyone agrees, these are all the things, then you build a strategy, and then you build a capital plan, correct?
Right,
and
right.
that's
So like,
all,
that's
that,
why.
and the capital plan and the
This is
zoning
true, you need
changes and.
that. I don't know.
that all
that's what
comes
happens here,
afterwards.
Because that's what we determined as a board,
Right,
is like
and-
how we take this and implement it.
Much,
But-
much like you adopted those goals for 2026, then everything you do in furtherance of meeting those goals, you'd also find in a comp plan.
Right,
So,
but to Jess's point, it's hard to tell in here, like, what has, like, what has the most impact, what.
but
you
that's. for
But
you
I-
all.
So here's a,
Right.
here's a.
Sorry, can I
here's
just,
a-
I just
sure.
want to finish trying to convey what I'm saying here. So if the question is, we need a comp plan to direct us, point us in a certain direction, like the boat is going in generally this direction, right? We think these are the priorities generally for the next 10 to 15 years. Then why are these recommendations in here? Like, shouldn't the recommendations be an appendix? Like, here's all the amazing ideas that our comp plan team came up with as possible ways for exploring this and not actually a set of
A plan.
recommendations within the comp plan, because then you're saying, no, we're gonna come up with a strategy for 2027 and 2028. Well, we've already said what the strategy is,
Right.
because now we have this 7,000
So
recommendations.
I would kind of look at it from this, I mean, we can, if there are particular recommendations that this board wants to, I'm gonna say, highlight as priority. We could give them a different color, right? We could say that those are priority recommendations. But in terms of,
Someplace.
Right,
Like,
but-
we built the downtown improvement task force was like built on the same sort of structure and like,
And guess where?
and we had.
Absolutely nowhere.
I know.
But the fact.
Well, there's a way to sort of, if,
Hey.
If we
got
had
$4.4
here-
million dollars. It went somewhere.
if we had in here if we could identify some of these recommendations that were gating to other recommendations, the handful of things in here that are the big dependencies without which you can't do a lot of the other things in here, even if they're smaller, right?
right,
You gotta do this before you can, this one thing before you can do these 18 things. That might be helpful just to
Right,
have to
we-
mark it that way.
Right.
And that doesn't get you everywhere you wanna go, but it certainly identifies, when we're looking at this post-adoption and what are we going to, how are we gonna triage it and tackle it, like there's at least an organizing system that says there are some things that you absolutely can't do first. Let's look at the things that we can do first, select those that are chewable this year, and then it becomes easier as you go down the road.
The matrix of like.
Yeah.
High priority, low effort. Low priority,
Mm-hmm.
high effort, whatever.
I mean, you could do that. I mean, I think the difficulty is like, that's easy to do with like, for example, like policy or like zoning, right? The more difficult part is like, you have recommendations here to help with like, continue moving forward with like, your emergency services facilities, right? Like, so, like when it starts coming to like actual spending of money or new studies or those types of things, that's where it comes to policy decisions in your so we can highlight those as like, high impact, important, projects to move forward on. But ultimately implementing those is up to the board, and it's also clearly tied to like budgets and finances and stuff like that. So, I mean, we can work with you to identify those types of like your priorities, and maybe that's. Maybe going, when you review the comprehensive plan, identifying, I mean, because I can say for a fact, like the zoning stuff, you're gonna wanna implement, right? But that's already been like identified as like the very next step, that's a huge.
Well, that's another
Foundation.
question, like maybe rather than breaking up all these. Okay, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's 8 themes, right? And
Yes.
all of the
Mhm.
recommendations are in the 8 themes.
Right.
And I wonder if maybe it's like, we know that all of these themes fundamentally, one way or another, touch nearly everything that the business of this board is to do these 8 things fundamentally, right? This government's purpose is to, we're now saying, this is, our ship is pointing in the direction of these 8, like, high level goals, right? And like this one page says, page 6 says basically, and community linkages, that's kind of like, that's where the ship is headed, and I wonder if maybe it's more like you had zoning and code reform, or, you know, edits, I don't know, whatever the appropriate word is, and then like capital planning, and then like programmatic ideas.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
You're talking about a different document. You're having a little bit of a everything everywhere all at once problem, like you're trying to, no, I mean, I don't mean this in like an offensive way. But I think that there is a thing that a comprehensive plan does, and there are many things that it doesn't. And I think to say,
I'm saying
no,
just all the stuff that's already.
no, it's not, it's not, because zoning changes don't go into a comprehensive plan, right? It's a totally separate.
But there are recommendations in here that say revisit the zoning,
That's right.
so that's what I'm saying, I'm not saying zoning, I'm
But
just
how
saying,
that happens is
Yeah.
its own separate
right, but
and independent
this
process.
might be more actionable, which is the only thing I'm interested in, is this being the effort that the volunteers and you all on this committee have put into this being as useful as an actionable and high impact as possible, given the hours and hours and hours of work that have gone into it.
But is,
Can we set it up in such a way where it's like, where we know, like, okay, Valerie's bucket for the next 2 years is this set of 10 recommendations that talk about zoning. I'm not saying put the zoning recommendations in there. I'm saying you have in here recommendations that address
But that,
zoning.
what you're describing is legislative. The thing you just described is a
No.
legislative action. Yes, it is.
And this
If
thing-
we are going to choose what
But you put these
what to,
recommendations in here. I'm not saying, I'm not
as a
saying,
reference for future legislation.
but it's not.
Hmm.
I'm telling you as someone who's reading this for the first time, because I know you're much more familiar with its contents than I am. I'm telling you that I'm having a hard time, and I know you and I think very differently about these things, and you're very familiar with its language. But to me, when I see this many recommendations, S 1.4, 1.5, S2, 2.3, 2.6, like. I don't really get why undertake actions that will decrease the urban heat island effect is like the same level of goal in this comprehensive plan as it's been drafted, as like incorporate sustainable and green infrastructure technology and building practices to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Like, I don't really understand why urban heat island isn't like a sub goal of that. You know what I mean? I think I
Yeah,
want
I mean,
this
that particular example
mean,
is
there's a
certain,
few.
has a carrying a certain
to,
redundancy.
that's just one that I have to
There's a
stop
few.
scrolling.
Yeah.
What
So
about,
I would say that, I mean, I've looked at a million of these and I feel like the structure of comp plans just is what it is what it is, but it also is the thing, like, I don't know how to make it that, I know what you're saying, and I know it's just
Well,
not in
it's-
any of the ones I've
What
ever
about-
seen.
what about in the implementation matrix, where we can add a couple other columns, and one would be like, what type of like recommendation is it in terms of, is it a capital project, right? Is it a policy? Is it a regulatory, right? So something that's clear that this is what you would need to do in order to implement that. But then also we could have another thing in terms of priorities, right? And maybe identify a number of them that this board's considering high priorities in order to be able to implement just the high priorities, right? We're not gonna necessarily judge anything, whether it's a low priority or medium priority, but the high priorities in terms of things that would really move the needle. Maybe we could do that.
Highlighting high
Yeah.
priority things would be great. I mean, I feel like that would be. If we were to ask the steering committee to like star the high priority things, just as
That's you.
But I think,
No, we want their input. Of course, we would have the
But-
call, like, they're not the
But
ones.
these are the ones, the steering committee has drafted this in a way where all the goals and recommendations are exactly equal.
I know,
So
but they're not.
now it's, right,
And they would agree that they're.
right, but they wouldn't know what the high priorities are. It's not supposed to be an
But they
action
would know
plan.
in like
It's-
sustainability, that's not an action idea, it's literally this action would have more impact than this other action, and so it would be better. If this, you should think of this action as more important, star,
Or
like,
if like all of the
and then-
zoning changes that would be needed to do the other 996 things in here need to happen first, then we need to know that, so that we
Someday.
can like spend the next 6 months getting the zoning changes done instead of like lobbing in all of our other many and multitudinous priorities that all of us feel like are the top priority, like, and these guys have been spending the most time with it, so doesn't mean we have to go 100% with it, but I think getting their recommendations for what the priorities would be would make sense.
But we also have to make sure that we're not, our goals in 2026 and 2027 are not necessarily the goals of, the board 5 years later after, it turns over a couple of times, right? So I wouldn't want to overly impose our point of view on this document. I agree that it's a little confusing in its flatness, its lack of hierarchy. But I've been reading it just as like a comprehensive list of ideas. I'm sorry, I said comprehensive, a thorough list of ideas.
but that's what it is.
And that's what it's supposed to,
Right.
Right.
yeah.
And sort of, it does make sense to me that there needs to be a sequence over the years of action documents that triage these against whatever the goals are as our board and future boards tackle, whatever is happening, whatever the priorities are for those boards. So I go back to what Michael said before, like, it does seem to me like it's a separate document. The action piece of it is a separate document. I think the idea of like putting like what the gating and slash priority items here, like adding a little bit of hierarchy, because you can't do these 10 things before you've done that one zoning thing or whatever thing, would be helpful, but how to action it, I think does feel like a separate conversation and separate document.
Like
And if
action
it's,
versus-
These all actions.
and if it's too granular and
Action it now, like what,
as
These are all.
you've pointed out, in many ways, they're duplicative to a certain amount. So if it's too granular and duplicative, then this is your document then to refine that and combine that and turn it into a recommendation that more accurately describes your goal and the aspiration. So if heat islands and green infrastructure, maybe that is too granular, maybe it needs to be combined in a way that makes it clearer to the legislative boards that will be following. And it also will be, things will come up that may or may not be prioritized in this document, but you'll be able to point to this document to guide you on prioritization, to guide you on appropriation, to guide you on.
And it's not just this board, I mean, the part of the argument against eliminating some of these like nuanced, like the difference, a very nuanced difference between 2 points. Is that this document gets used like 8 years from now for a large development by the planning board that is looking at very specific things. And that specific thing, right, that's presented might not be in the zoning or building code somewhere. But there is a reference to a strategy in this document that then can be used as a way to address this particular, I'm just gonna use this because you use the heat island effect when it comes to a parking lot design at a new large development or something like that. So I also want to be careful that, you know, like, so all of the various boards are were represented by someone. They brought this back to their respective boards. Those boards all kind of put in, and then it got sort of, negotiated. But so some of those, in some instances, like you're looking at a thing that you haven't necessarily ever thought of before, right? Like the heat island comment. But there's a group of people in Dobbs Ferry who volunteer and found this to be sufficiently important for this type of thinking to put it in this document. And it may be very valuable down the road for someone else in ways that we just can't imagine. So I also just want to be careful about saying like, this is kind of semi-redundant. This thing sort of says this thing to me, the same as point 14 and 42 are the same. So I'm not against some efficiency in the document. But I'm also, I would be wary about like taking a particular point that like you or me or you don't fully understand its value. And then saying like, this could be eliminated because the other thing is kind of saying this in a general way. Because that's how it gets used by
Right.
zoning and planning and building department and all.
And I would look at it like goals are like the overarching and the recommendations are things to implement that particular goal. So there might be 5 or 6 different recommendations to implement a particular goal, but that doesn't mean like every one of them is definitely going to get implemented. But these are a selection of ideas that could be implemented. And as you move over the next number of years, some will become easier to implement than others, right? And some of them, but in a way that they will all help achieve that goal.
And if you disagree with the classifications on page 146, for example, on the timeline, medium, short, that of course can be easily revised if you think that there's more.
Okay, here's what I recommend, having heard about all this. This is maybe just for an invitation to consider, not necessarily to respond to right now. Okay, so we have themes and we have goals, and the goals, I guess, are within the theme of sustainability. We have these 8 goals. Okay, great. I agree with all of them. I have no problem with leaving heat islands as a separate one. That was just the first thing I stopped on. What if we take the recommendations and put all the recommendations in an appendix or something? I think where I'm getting a little tripped up, and most people who read this, the planning board as maybe one potential exception, but this is not only a planning board document, right? Is like, there's so much dense text to get to the final set of goals for the final theme that, like, I think maybe if it was like we went broad, we did all the broad and then we did the next layer broad and then the next, like these, like what you just said, these are some ideas for maybe how some of our goals within sustainability get met. It might, not all of these recommendations might need to happen, and there may be recommendations that future committees or boards come up with that are more effective at meeting the goal than what's here. But I just think to have to get through all,
What if we put a listing of all the goals and recommendations, like right after it says goals and just have like a thing that says goals, right? And you list all the goals. And then we go into another section that says recommendations, right? And then you can have sustainability, and then you have the goals, and then the goal with the recommendations.
And as long as also there's like context, like this is a list of possible ideas that the group came up with. This may be, this may not be, this is not exclusive or exhaustive list, and there may be things on here that don't end up needing to be done. But, in 2026, that was our committee's.
We can't keep referring back to the committee because we just have a steering group at this point. We didn't appoint a committee, which has very strict statutory implications. So the steering committee has now provided this draft, and now this is your
Board
document.
of Trustees has
Right.
So we
in
have to,
2026, that's fine. I don't know what all the correct language is, but.
So
I think
if-
we get
well,
the
Right.
nut of what.
And then I just wanna say this is not a response to you, but just a way for you to maybe think about this in a slightly different way. This is much more, and I know no one uses it anymore, much more encyclopedia than novel. Right, like this, or than essay, right? It is like a giant reference. And so to think of it as a narrative that one reads through isn't quite the right way to approach this document as you might another type of document that you're in some ways describing. So while I'm all for some additional structure to help people get the main point of what we're doing and what are higher priorities than others, it is more of a very large reference. So we could take out all those things and put them elsewhere, but I don't know.
You know, there is also, you know, a how to use this document section that's not really here. You know, there's a purpose of the comprehensive plan document, but a little bit of like how to use it is not a bad idea for. I shouldn't say that because it was my idea, but of the just upfront, like, you know. How you should be using this.
To me, it's
So-
more,
Future.
more like a repository of all your ideas in one, hate to say comprehensive place. And one thing I would guard against also is when you're going out there to get grants, if you prioritize things and something that you're trying to get, you give the grant people the document, they're saying, well, how come it's not priority one? It's not a big priority for us either. So you don't want to paint yourself in a corner.
That is true. Yeah, I think we can put a little bit how we use it. I think most people that use, I use your comprehensive plans on a regular basis, right? And other land use boards and other, like developers, applicants will use it on a consistent basis, right? They know, and that's what Mike was saying, like, that's really important, because if I need to understand something about transportation or about like natural resources, I go right to that section and start looking at the goals. and
Maybe it's
recommendations.
instead of being part of the document, it's a cover letter, because the next stage of this is public feedback, so the public needs to know how to
Right.
use, how this
How it
document
will
is
be
going to
used.
be used.
Yeah. Yeah, because
So-
you're required to have two public hearings. Your first one will be to get that input. And then once you have a final, then the second public hearing will be prior to the adoption of that final. So you'll have a lot of opportunity to get comments. You can hold meetings in other ways. You can do, so, I mean, there's a lot to accomplish between now and adoption. And the reason why it's important that this is your document, that the legislative board is doing it, because in general, you would refer it to the planning board for comments and recommendations, but you've already received those during the steering committee process. And I'd say more than half of the sets of circumstances, a comp plan is accompanied by a generic environmental impact statement. And so that was the 18 to 24 months of time you were avoiding by creating this specialty steering committee. So you were jumping over 18 to 24 months in order to get to the point you're at tonight, to look at it and to massage it and I like the idea of like, who's using this? How are they using it? Why is it, we can certainly work.
I mean, I think just because it's historically and elsewhere used as an encyclopedia, and that the only developers and land use boards are the ones who primarily use it. All I'm saying is with the same information, perhaps we can make it more legible and actionable and useful for our community, which is who the point of this is that we're translating the values that we've heard via the steering committee, through all the public listening sessions, and finally through the 2 public hearings that we're gonna have on it, eventually translating what we're hearing from our community into a, set of values and goals that should help direct, again, this Dobbs Ferry in whatever direction we want it to go in. And, I think we can, it's all here. We can just
I just wanna stop because you guys aren't speaking.
Well, I have comments, but they're specific to what's the actual substance, so
Yep,
it's more specific
Okay.
and less
so
general,
we haven't
so-
wrapped up this one yet.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
just wanted to make sure that
You know,
you
there's,
were invited to speak because you're being too quiet,
there's,
but.
there's a
again,
way of thinking about this too, which is like, we're reading, like I picked up and I started with the comp plan revised draft. But where the process started was with the existing conditions, which are is a description of what Dobbs Ferry is, what the problems are, what the past has been. And it also has, you know, at least in the draft I saw, which was very much a working draft in the past, was where some of the ideas started to come from for fixing those things that made it into this document. So there's a sort of a more narrative style of reading this that starts with existing conditions before it gets to comprehensive plan, so that there's a little bit more context than just the goals and recommendations. There's also the reasons. So, you know, again, when we put this out in front of the public, that might be a thing that we want to say, is like, you know, this end document actually starts in the appendix.
The Terrytown one. I've been opening other ones in the meantime, and the way it's structured is that you have the goals. And they outline all the goals, and they are in sections, it's not like designed to understand that. But then when they talk about a goal, they don't say the goal and then say what all the recommendations are. They say the goal and they say why that's the goal. And then, you know, elsewhere in terms of implementation, they have recommendations of how to achieve the goals. And so I think that's kind of the push and pull that might be what you're responding to, is that the content of this plan is recommendations organized by goals versus goals.
And without
With-
context.
Recommendations, you know, and so it makes it potentially, I mean, it's just all information organized different ways. And I think like ultimately, to Laura's point of having feedback on a specific thing, that's what it's saying. I think we should just take that and think about it further as to how we can. If there's a thing that we should do to improve that. Because I had always, like, whenever I didn't need to be an expert in anything to read this and understand what was trying to be accomplished. Like, I didn't need to have a page at the front that told me what it was meant to do. It just was clear, like, these are the goals of this plan, is to accomplish these things, and this is why. You know, and this is what led us here. And then at the end, it's like, here's how we can get there, and ours is primarily how we can get there in like a million different ways. And like more goals necessarily than need to be there, because there are some very specific goals that are kind of like things that are goals that would help us achieve a different goal, you know?
Yeah.
Like incorporate green stormwater technologies into sidewalks, streets and parking lots is a goal, but it's also a thing to do, not a goal. It's not like a goal of sustainability, you know, having, you know, cleaner water. The goal is a thing to do, which is
That's the
more
strategy for
specific.
accomplishing your goal.
Strategy versus tactic.
Yeah,
Right.
so it's a big
But I
question.
think, right, I
Which
think,
would change substantially a lot of how it's done, but again, it's more structure than like content.
I think your committee and the village in general, you have a lot of documents that start, you already have a lot of documents that already kind of give you those broader goals. And this is really pulling those broader goals in and then saying, okay, let's actually, like, how do we implement these measures, right? So this is a very action-oriented type of document versus, you know, some other comprehensive plans, which might be a little bit more goal or
Specific.
policy oriented.
What are those documents that like summarize those things?
What do you
You're referring to?
Like the energy action.
Oh, so in the existing conditions?
Yeah, we asked them to give us the studies that were out there and the resources that were
Right.
available, and the steering committee brought all of that in, and the content of that really was distilled into
I
this.
can tell you so we have links in your existing conditions that deal with your bike and parking standards, your concept plans for Route 9, your hazard mitigation plan, your parking management reports, pedestrian safety studies, resiliency implementation and strategy enhancements, your Dobbs Ferry climate smart communities, silver certification recommendations, your climate change and community engagement, your greenhouse gas inventory, your waste management and policy analysis, energy conservation study.
Like, it's all there, but it's not like a normal human isn't gonna like.
That's right. But you're never, right, that's part of the issue is that I have like 20 different things that you're.
Right, but
you're
I'm saying
existing-
if it's all out there and it's a matter of like, the goal's already here, it's already in this document, so it's like, based on all these, massive inventory. And the fact that we're ahead of the game with all these recommendations and it's an implementation oriented document, unlike most comprehensive plans, I guess. Like, just so we level set for everyone. You know, I think having that front, maybe contracts.
Right, so we can
I
put
guess.
more, I think, yeah, this has been a little push-pull between content, I mean, because there was a little bit more meat in terms of the upfront stuff, but then I think the committee was concerned with
You didn't
getting
get to it,
people
yeah.
to the goals and recommendations as soon as possible, as opposed to providing a lot more content and information for each one of the categories. So, I mean, I think that's part of the challenge. But I think if for some reason this board who's looking at it from fresh eyes feels like you need a little bit more detail or context as to why we're getting to these goals and recommendations, and then we can always put some information about it.
I mean, I'm not trying to create busy work, I'm just trying to organize it in a way that's.
But we did have a substance question coming
Well,
from this side.
I have 3 comments, but they're like specific to recommendations that are in here, so I don't know. You want me to say that now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna go, this is not a priority order, but the first one is on the institutions, you know, for further planning on some of the institutional land. If it's a nonprofit and they're not paying property taxes and they're gonna be developing, not selling the land, but developing it for an income producing use, like,
They wouldn't.
but they could. And there's nothing in here that talks about like a pilot, like a payment in lieu of taxes or any sort of like community benefits agreement or anything like that. Like, for example, Children's Village, I'm saying theoretically, I'm not saying they're gonna do this, but they could build affordable housing where they get revenue from that, or, I mean, that's one example, but so I don't think that this plan addresses that at all, and I'm not saying any like specific recommendations, but just more general. And then my second comment is on the.
Oh, wait, on that. You feel like it should.
Yeah, just to address that, like
Mhm.
Madison Square Garden doesn't pay property taxes. Cause it's on, you know, it's on like Penn Station, above Penn Station, right? So like. I that's like an extreme example, and the Knicks are on everyone's mind, but like, I'm just saying, like, this should be something that maybe we should. Address in the plan of like, if they. Build
Well,
housing or
it
something.
would be assessed. I'm working on a project in another community right now where there is a membership club that is licensing, leasing space from a community, and that membership club is subject to assessment and taxation. So the agreements, it's an assessment function, and they would be subject to real estate taxes if they're generating revenue
Okay.
beyond the,
You're saying it's legal and assessment, it's not policy.
it is, yes. It's an assessment, a function.
Like a
of-
special assessment?
No, it's
It's
an
a
actual
property tax.
assessment, yeah.
Okay.
But I think to your point about Madison Square Garden, like, they're generating revenue.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I'm not like an expert on this, but I just know like there's some examples where there's, pilots, where if there's a city-owned property that there's, for development, then, and they pay some sort of pilot, or there's some sort of agreement, or if a nonprofit takes it over, for example.
Right, any pilot agreement would have to come to this board,
Right.
right? So
And a
that,
pilot would be to avoid taxes.
Is there a place in the? I think
In
Laura's
lieu of
question-
taxes, if it was a nonprofit use.
Is there a place in this comprehensive plan, and I don't know what all needs to go in a comprehensive plan versus live elsewhere, but is there something, I think, at this level of plan to address Laura's concern that like, that even non-property tax paying entities are,
No,
important.
there's not, but I guess the question is, does it need to be? And so I will, like, when we conceived of this, right, we were thinking, okay,
They sold.
I own the golf course and I sell it to Matt.
Yeah,
and he
yeah,
wants to build a
yeah.
bunch of houses there, right? Like, that was the way we were thinking
Yeah.
about this. Now,
Right.
what you're
We want to
saying
build
is.
A bunch of houses there, as a matter of fact.
But like, what you're saying is if I'm a school and I build a bunch of houses
Right.
to lease to help pay, my bills
Yes.
to run the school, how would that
Yeah.
work?
Right.
Like, we definitely didn't talk about that. I have no idea how that works, but if
Yeah.
there's a clear path
The,
in sort of in everyday.
But is that something that we would?
It's
have
happen-
a
it's something
goal
that
about?
happens automatically. For example, SUNY purchase. As
Ah,
a development,
Yes.
senior
Right.
living development. SUNY
Yeah.
purchase doesn't pay real estate taxes, but that development does. It's a function of the assessment based upon the use of the property.
Okay,
Right.
So we don't have to worry about it.
When I read this, I was like, that was just something that came to my mind,
Yeah.
like, oh, if they develop the site,
Interesting point.
would they?
Good.
Right.
But, okay, so I guess that answers my question.
Yeah,
The second one is on the historic district. I guess, talking about, designating historic properties. I don't know, and I don't know the answer to this either, but like, would that? I know that historic designations can allow for additional grant funding, which it says in here, but. Are there any downsides to that? Like, is it harder to make upgrades to buildings? Is there less
That fits in
flexibility?
a bigger context, because we have, and so part of the planning and architecture review board, that part of their role is to assess and designate properties or areas of historic value. And however you want to define that, right? That's where the debate lies. That's already been done to some extent, so there is a historic district in Belden, along Belden Avenue, includes some of the adjacent areas, but. And there's been some progress on creating another historic district that's part of, includes part of downtown areas. And for those historic districts, guidelines have been created and adopted by this board for how one can renovate that, not just specific properties, but also like how you address window restoration
right.
or roof replacement or additions or, all the sort of various things.
It's also a comprehensive document.
And so that document already exists. It's just like, we're like referencing.
Hear about like the national.
That we have no control
Like a
over.
register?
Yeah, I thought there was something on here about like the national.
you already have
Like
have
6
some
of them or
properties,
so.
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So just,
That's completely outside of us. That's a
Yeah,
national
yeah.
park service thing. It's like-
Yeah. Sometimes when places get designated, it does make it harder for flexibility and like eventually could conflict with some of the other goals.
Right.
on, like,
You already-
more housing or.
Right, you already have regulations that already outline the adoption process. And there would be public hearings and stuff like that. So this is just highlighting that you do have some additional historic properties that you could consider if you wanted to expand. Right now, you just have it you have just one small historic district, right? It's in a residential neighborhood. But you could look at other areas or other buildings if at some point you want to, and that's really what it's highlighting.
And actually, the planning board and architecture board are supposed to think about those, put that together and bring that to this board as a proposal. In the past, it's been resident groups that, sort of form together to try to work on those things.
so the historic review board, the architectural historic review board gets. That topic or gets a property, either on their own impetus, they they say, you know, we'd like to look into this further, or
Right.
a neighborhood group or an individual comes forward and brings it, and then they look into it. So that process is in place, and the criteria has been adopted in terms of what changes can't be done, and
Right.
the discretion of the
Okay.
board.
And my third thing is. On the concept designs. I brought this up before, that I hate the roundabout at Broadway and Ashford, and I see it's listed as a a
Oh,
concept
that's
design.
that's from,
Representing
yeah, that's from the Route 9.
Feasibility.
And, you know, I think it conflicts with the goal and the recommendation for, because I think it prioritizes cars and not pedestrians.
The traffic committee disagrees.
And
I do
a
too.
regular, and I've looked into this,
Mm.
a regular light at a four-way, stop. Across a
Intersection.
intersection, thank you.
Always
A
stop.
roundabout can be safer, but it's not safer, there's no evidence that it's safer than a scramble or a barn dance intersection where all sides have to stop for people to cross. It is safer, a roundabout crosswalk is safer if it's just a regular stoplight where cars can turn, but it is not safer, and it will prioritize cars. Yes, it will help to move the traffic flow on Ashford, which we know is a problem, but our goal is to also encourage people to walk, and with all the kids walking to the middle school and the high school. I mean, I cross there every day. It's dangerous because cars drive really fast. So sorry, I know that's a very specific thing and it's not even listed anywhere else, but it's just in the concept design, so
Yes.
that's
Okay.
kind of.
Point received,
Yes.
but not to be determined by our comprehensive. You should, anything?
She represented us.
So there is a thing that I feel is missing, that is like our responsibility, that is around governance and how we like this. We had representatives of the Board of Trustees on the steering committee over the years, but I don't think that we have taken the proper minute to look at like a section that is just about how we administrate and operate the village.
Okay.
Which is kind of a gaping hole now that I think about it, like it's not, you know, like there's no fiscal responsibility type of language or goals around, you know, are we willing to do all of this at any expense, or what is our, you know, what is our goal in how we're going to move forward with the village? And so I might take that as something that we need to think about.
Adding a section, adding
Potentially a governance section.
Governance.
Or it could go in. I don't know, business and economy is a section. It could be less specifically about businesses like it is, and more about, you know,
fiscal responsibility.
how we spend money toward all these things and our thinking. And that's kind of what is,
Well, it also could go in the implementation section
Yeah,
too,
that's
right? We
probably
have a
better.
whole implementation section that starts off with, the implementation section has the initial, like. The comprehensive, the zoning goal, right, to, implement. The zoning changes, and then it goes into concept studies and inventories, and it specifically identifies. Like the key maps, and then also the additional studies, maps or inventories that are recommended throughout, and then it goes into the implementation matrix, but maybe. Before the implementation matrix, there's another section, or maybe that's the first section, it's the overall governance.
I just think there could be a set of goals that we would want the village to
Okay,
be
I mean, we could even just have it as another chapter if you want, it's.
really messing with the timeline. But.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put that out there in case anyone else is.
But-
It's just something that did not come to me until now, and then
It would be specific to the implementation of, so.
No, it's like a goal of
Broad.
Village of
broad village
Doxbury is to
administration
not
program.
price out people from living here because we are spending so much money,
Okay.
right? You know,
Right.
it's like that.
It's,
Okay, I understand. So that is actually part of this. It's not a, you
not an
know, a new
actual-
constitution for Dobbs Ferry.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, it's like in the same way that we would want, you know, to improve diversity of businesses or what, you know, any of these goals, it would be a goal, but it's more of a goal, like a lot of these were kind of coming from existing conditions and like the categories and the committees and stuff that we're on. But if we were to think of what would be
Like the one committee that was not.
exactly, like, I mean, we were there and, you know, but I was on it in different capacities in the time that I've been on it, and so it was not really considered in that way,
yeah. and
beyond
since-
land use.
But since this is your document, you can
And it might just be one or two things.
put in, yeah. You can put executive summary or a, whatever we call it, but you can put in those bullet points. It's clear. That's the overarching goal of the whole thorough document,
Comprehensive, one might say.
one might say.
So I'm gonna say, I think a little homework for this
Yeah.
board would probably
got
be
till the
one
end
to
of the month.
figure out if you actually do wanna do calls, you know, wanna have your own goals,
Mhm.
right, as part of this comprehensive plan. And
If
then,
there's like, I think our goal would be to look at this and think from like 1,000 feet up in terms of how we govern the village. Are there things that should be in there that are not tied to any specific theme? If not, then that's fine, but I just want us to have that as homework.
right,
as
and I
our
think the
goal.
other thing is also to figure out if you want. Like if you want the goals as like a standalone chapter,
Right, yeah, we'll talk.
and
about that
then.
more.
Like peel off with the recommendations,
Mhm.
um,
Right,
So, all right, so I'm just gonna put the 2 takeaways.
I mean, the other option is you could have like the intros, like these are just some things, but like you could have the intro to transportation and mobility and then have the goals.
Mhm.
And then have like a separate thing, another section for just the recommendations of those.
right.
So, I mean. Just have to figure that out.
Cause you have this vision statement.
They wanted to.
Yeah, but you have the vision statement, so you might even enhance the vision statement as
Yeah,
a statement from the Board of Trustees. You
Right.
have, now that's on page 5, so that's really ready right off the bat. So that
Right.
might be an appropriate place to put more specific
right.
Board of Trustees statement and purpose or whatever you want to call it.
All right.
I do appreciate how much work went into this, but I just feel like I have to say, and also. As someone who went to school for urban planning, a lot of this is like really best practices and very forward thinking, and I appreciate it. I did notice 1 or 2 words that were missing here or there. I know you said you're gonna reread it, but I can also send those to you, because
I've got a.
Got it.
Cause like no matter how many times we read it,
Yeah.
it's just like every time I read it, I'm like, oh.
And InDesign doesn't do spell
no
check,
spell
and when you're
check
cutting and pasting.
Design has spell check.
No, it doesn't.
That's totally does.
Right.
Swear to God, it does. Oh, okay.
Show us
Only
where it
two I
is,
know.
Cause I don't.
And I.
Okay,
Well, anyhow, there was a lot of cutting and pasting from.
So when-
Word, so.
When do you
sometimes-
want, when do you, what is the deadline to
End of
get
June.
this? These
End of
2
June.
items of homework?
end of June. That's what she
June.
said. June 30th?
Well, yes, I mean, I'm happy
No,
to
but you're gonna
have,
have to go back on a public meeting, so let's make sure we have,
Mhm.
Well,
Well,
weird,
well, I mean-
we send.
Well, I think at this
No, we
point,
would
let's
send it
figure out,
and
right,
then
yeah, and I think
we can
also,
decide whether or not it can get to the July 14th meeting as without another discussion
Right.
or with or one more workshop.
yeah, I mean, also we'll need to, yeah, so let's just pull everything together at the, figure out, and I'm also happy to have any other meetings or calls with anybody to help kind of figure out that final document
Right,
layout.
because we do have to put it out
Right, my guess
to
is.
the
if we-
public
it
for the
sounds
first
like-
hearing to get
Right.
their recommended changes.
Right, my guess is, based on what I'm hearing, we'll probably wanna. Probably need a little bit of time to reorganize everything and then. Resend it out to both the committee board. So most likely maybe have like, plan for like the September. Public hearing.
Which is the first one or the second one?
First one,
The first one, okay. And we need the 30 days to get it to county planning.
right,
Before that? Or,
Well, you can't adopt it until you
Oh, yeah.
have the 30 day. You can't adopt it. You can get the public
Right.
input, but you can't adopt it without the 239
right,
and
I would like the next time that we bring it back, it's like a. Like, we're almost there, right, so if it means putting the extra time in to get that together, I'd rather do that than. The July 14th.
yeah. Okay. All right, number 2. Did you, it was 1 hour? Yeah, 1 hour, time for an hour. Number 2. So New York Ford did not choose to fund in any capacity our Cedar and Main Plaza, our High Street go-kart, or public art fund. We thank them for their consideration. And now we need to decide as a board what you want to do with these projects that we put forward and we're willing to, fund in partial and half some of them. At what priority and just get some input on that as we start to think about either applying for more grants for these projects, which are, developed, point that we could just submit them again for things.